Oh yes, we're going to focus on the budget. Some highlights do also exist, but it does appear the National Assembly want to hit the ground running on this one. Well, that's because look at what they've put out as the procedures, the steps that they'd like to fulfill, and timeline before the passage of the budget. They're going to start with a debate on the general principles of that budget, which they say will be on from the 10th to the 11th of October. Then they'll have a public hearing on the 21st and 22nd. Remember the last time out, they had that public hearing. They say they wanted to ensure that the public have their inputs, but I just wonder if the public say, no, we don't want this particular cause, and they generally agree on that, how they will reflect it. If they say, you know what, those constituency projects, the representative, the people think that National Assembly, can you think twice about this? Well, I'm just thinking aloud.
Postulating.
But they have the submission on defense by MDAs as well, which is a point where they've consistently raised that, saying, look, the MDAs usually don't appear in good time too. And when they do, they don't come with some of the documents that they say they require of them. But who knows if there'll be a lot of difference this time around. The deadline for submission and defense, 5th of November, collation and harmonization of reports. Both chambers have got to do that. And then they will present the final reports to National Assembly before the target passage for the first week of December. So if they do that, in their words, they would have hit the bullseye.
You know, I'll give it to them. I mean, so far, we've not heard the term budget padding, which I believe is good. So we hope
we haven't begun to look at the budget. So
but you know, I mean, this time, you know what I mean. So I really hope that moving forward, we'll have a smooth process, and there will be, you know, some form of good quality to this budget.
Well, the thing that interests me in this whole process is, and forgive me, guys, for sounding like a broken record, I hope we'll be able to factor in the Auditor General's report, you know, of over the past few years. There are some consistencies that, you know, if the government is really going to take a more stringent approach to the anti-corruption fight, then the Auditor General's report is a very, very good instrument to look at.
You know what? You give us a page from the Auditor's report because you have the gentlemen in Abuja when they do start responding. So we'll let you do that. Hopefully there should be time for that, even if it's a question or two from on page 5 or chapter 7 of the report. Well, Mark, go ahead.
Well, talking about Abuja, I must mention the fact that you guys came around when I was away, and we had been planning this a long time, so you have to come back again. But this morning, I have company, yes, even though you're not here. Two fine gentlemen. Honorable Igariwe Enwo is the Deputy Chair, House Committee on Appropriation. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily.
Thank you.
He's also a member of the People's Democratic Party. Mr. Wale Oluwade is a management consultant and principal partner, Growth Masters Consultant. You're also welcome to Sunrise Daily.
Thank you, Mokwe.
Well, gentlemen, the budget has been presented. You were there when the president read his budget presentation speech in front of a joint committee of the joint chambers of the National Assembly. There has been comments, their hopes, their expectations, as rightly there should be, and in some instances criticisms as well. Some people are not very optimistic about the assumptions upon which this budget is based. But let me ask you, first and foremost, what did you make of the mood? Because that was where our correspondent, Linda Kigbe, started. She noted that the mood was a little different. Do you think that the mood will have anything to do with the final passage of this budget?
Definitely. The mood was a lot different. The environment was convivial. I think legislators were happy that the budget was being presented early enough. The budget is a two-way traffic. It belongs to the parliament, it also belongs to the executive. So most times people think it's the parliament that delays the process. No, if you bring it late, it comes out late. So this time we were expecting the budget to come early, and it came early. So the atmosphere was very good. And of course, we should also know that we have a new leadership in the National Assembly. So I think there is definitely a new chemistry between the legislature today, the Ninth Assembly, and the executive. So we were quite happy. Coming to the assumptions, I think the assumptions are realistic enough. you have to make a comparison with what it was last year. The assumption both on oil production is realistic. We are looking at 2.18. The last time it was 2.30. It wasn't realizable. The price now is also more realistic at $57. Last time it was $60. And of course, we are still at 305 naira to $1. So I think the assumptions are quite realistic. And so we are hopeful that the budget will do better this time around.
Even though we still do not know just how the 2019 budget has performed so far, what exactly the basis for that optimism is, the president has also mentioned the fact that, you know, some of the earnings that he expected did not do so well, especially the non-oil revenue earnings. And one of the reasons why we're seeing an increase in VAT is because it was seen that maybe it's a little difficult to widen the tax net, but it is a lot easier to increase it. I mean, there are questions around that as well. But let me ask you if you share his optimism, Mr. Oluwade. Looking at the president's speech, do you feel that we are on the right track to growth for the economy? Because that's where a lot of people, you know, think that our budget must be able to lift us out of poverty. It must be able to provide infrastructure that we need, and of course, provide the growth, the economic growth that we all want.
Thank you, Mokwe. I've gone through the budget, you know, and I'm hard pressed to find
the entire document, or just the executive summary.
The executive summary, you know. And but it's not really much, you know. I've gone through it, you know, and I'm hard pressed to find any cause for optimism, you know. And I say that with every sense of responsibility as a Nigerian. Generally speaking, 10.33 trillion naira. If you convert that to dollars using 305 naira, that gives you 33.5, roughly 34 billion US dollars. Divided by 200 million Nigerians, that gives you $170 per Nigerian. So Nigeria, as a father to 200 million Nigerians, is saying, I'm going to spend on you for 1 year $170, not 17,000, not 1,700, $170 per capita per Nigerian. And that's what you're going to use. Okay, let me bring that to Naira. That's 52,000, approximately actually, 52,000 Naira per Nigerian for an entire year. That's what you use for education, for health, for the roads, for waste management, for utility, name it.
But that's not how it works. I mean,
that's how it works. That's how it works, Malcolm. See, I'm trying to sound very simple, to break it down to the viewers without necessarily being simplistic, you know. And I'm telling you, that is how it works.
Now, my point is, some people are going to certainly get more than others. Yes, on the average, that's how it's...
Now you're coming to where I'm going to. The tragedy actually is that I wish it actually went, I mean, every Nigerian got to 52,000. But the tragedy of our reality is that maybe 2 million people corner 95% of that. And that's why you have the chasm between the haves and the have-nots in Nigeria. That's why you have this huge this social inequality in Nigeria, because there's so many disconnected from, you know, the resources of this country. That's speaking generally. Let me speak specifically to the budget. Now, the parameters. He spoke about the crude oil benchmark.
Just before you get to the parameters, and let me take you up on the size of the budget. I mean, the fact that some people say this is a record, and it is indeed a record. This is the first time that we're hearing of 10.33 trillion naira in budget expenditure. This is what we are hoping to spend. What would you have said we should be looking at?
This budget is abysmal. It's totally abysmal compared to the size of Nigeria. South Africa has 55 million people. They're spending budget of maybe 190. 2018 was $133 billion for 55 million people. Angola, population of maybe 20 million, like 50, 60 billion dollars.
So I see your point.
Yes.
The thing is, shouldn't we be cutting our coat according to our cloth?
I don't get to cutting our coat according to our cloth. How?
It would seem that incrementally, we have seen an increase over the years in terms of, you know, what we propose as budget expenditure. But then, you know, you have said, and a lot of people have also said it, that this indeed is too small, cannot go around
it is
and
not
cannot
too small, it is abysmal.
So the question is, should we be looking, should we just be proposing a budget size that is unrealistic?
That's not the point. The point is this, our GDP is almost $400 billion. So we cannot be doing a budget that is less than 10% of the GDP. America's budget relative to GDP is about 25%. If we intend to grow this economy by double digits, we can't be doing this abysmal figure. We're not going to grow this economy, not to talk of human capital development. And that's part of the parameters we want us to look at. Because in the figures, the president proposed 48 billion for education. Now, if I'm generous enough to add 112 billion for UBEC, to add to that's 150 billion, it is still far below the threshold, UNESCO threshold for budget on education, 25%. What about health? 46 billion. Now, the signature agenda of this government, you and I start here on June 12th or even May 29th, is lifting 100 million people out of poverty in 10 years. Guess what? In the last 3 years, 2019, 2018, 2017, the SIP budget was 500 billion. And I told you that is abysmal. That's too small. Because on a yearly basis, we need to be doing at least 1 trillion naira targeted at lifting out poverty, poor people, extreme poor people. But guess what? In the curious wisdom of the president, the budget for SIP is 30 billion naira, not even dollars, 30 billion naira. Where's the optimism? And this budget is christened budget of growth and human capital development. I can't see that. I don't see the cost. I told you, I didn't sleep. I went through this budget. I am hard-pressed, to find any cause for optimism.
So if I get you clearly, you are saying that this budget is not bold enough.
It's dead on arrival.
Is it that it's not bold enough?
It's not going to scratch the surface. It's a drop in an ocean.
The reason I ask you this is that some people will say, to get the figures that you're proposing that we be looking at, 10% of our GDP.
More than 10% of GDP,
we need
15%.
We need to take really, really bold
kickstart
steps.
this economy,
So, it's not bold enough? Is that what you're saying?
No, absolutely not. It's abysmal.
You heard him.
Yeah.
It's abysmal. That's what he says.
Budget is a plan. And I was happy when you talked about realism. We have to be realistic about a budget. It's a mere plan. What does it profit us if we make a budget of 20 trillion? What are your revenue sources? Our basic revenue sources are oil and gas, and then the non-oil sector. So what actually do we have as our revenue sources? So those are the fundamentals we must think of. And then you realize we're just coming out of a recession. So the budget must be realistic. And so I think that's the most important thing we should think of is the intendment of this budget. What is it supposed to achieve? And like he said, it is intended to continue growth. We're already gradually approaching growth out of recession. And then it is intended to widen the economy, to create jobs. So I think if we can start from there, we are following a mid-term plan. It's for 3 years. After 3 years, we take it off from there. So I think it has to be incremental. We can't afford to be revolutionary about it. That's what I think.
Why not?
We have to be realistic. We have to be realistic. It's like you talking about cutting your cloth according to your cloth according to your size. We have to be realistic about our revenue sources. Where are you going to get the revenue? Government is trying to be prudent enough, according to them, to plug the leakages. Government is trying to expand the revenue sources. Presently, we get nearly 90% of our foreign revenue from oil alone. It still remains that way. So we must be realistic about it. So we are thinking of getting revenue from other non-oil sources. And until we achieve that, we can't be planning in the air. So the budget has to be realistic enough. And I think that is what we got yesterday.
You heard him?
Absolutely.
Do you agree with
he has a point about the revenues, which I was going to come to that, because the challenge is actually, how do you fund the budget? We could have a 30 trillion naira budget, but the challenge, because even this one, we can't fund it, But Mark, I just told you, this is an economy of 400 billion, close to $400 billion economy. So the money is available. We have local investors who would put their money in public-private partnership, programs for infrastructure. Imagine if the 262 billion allocated for works and housing, came from, the financial system. the stock market or, foreign investors came in with that money. And the 262 billion is put in SIP programs because there is money in this economy. But locally, what is happening is that local investors aren't encouraged to invest in the Nigerian economy, non-stock of foreign investors. Let me tell you something, Marco. FDIs, foreign direct investors, they're like tourists. Now, tourists only go to safe havens. I've traveled fairly well all over the world. I've never been in an airplane with anybody going to Afghanistan or Iraq, and I'm sorry for those who are Afghanistans, because they're not considered as safe havens. Not even for, I'm saying security of lives.
Yeah, but even
to now imagine the safety of investment.
Even
so
in places
if
of war,
no, I'm trying to make this critical
people
point.
make a
I'm
profit.
No.
There are those who actually go there to profit.
No. That's hot money. We call them hot money. Portfolio investors, and where do they put the money? They put the money in the capital markets. And if they see any likelihood of any volatility, they take the money, they go. We're talking about investment in real sector, in infrastructure. We're not talking about stock market investment. And then don't believe this hula baloo about remittances. Remittances are people's relatives living outside the country who send money to their relatives in Nigeria to build a house in the village, to pay school fees, to do. Is that how you grow an economy?
It still adds to the economy.
No, Mark, well, let's face the facts. The fundamentals, we are living like ostriches. The Nigerian leaders, the elite, we live like ostriches. We bury our head in the sand. Now, how do I mean? The brutal facts that need to be confronted are not confronted. Population. I've told you this. This is the third time I'm saying this. You can have this 200 million or 100 million plus or 95 million plus in extreme poverty and hope to grow your economy at double digits. It's not going to happen. You cannot have almost half of your population non-productive, unproductive, and you hope to grow your GDP at 5%, 6%, not talk of 10%. It's not going to happen. So we need to make a clear-cut policy pronouncement on population control. China, that you and I have talked about severally here, had the policy pronouncement on population. One child per family for many years. And that's why China was able to close, to move out almost 800 and something million people out of poverty and grow the economy at double percentage GDP growth rate for 20, 30 years to become the second largest economy in the world. We need to do that. Now, next to population control, we need
that
to
has given problems to China. China has had to take a
now
second
they are
look at
begging them to have kids.
Now they're begging them to have kids, and they are now
But
beginning
we are not
to say
there
that
yet.
they have an aging population. Wondering how this.
Let us grow this economy. Then we can address that when the time comes. We'll cross that bridge when we get there.
But shouldn't we be learning from the lessons that others are garnering?
I would rather we have that
mistakes?
problem than this problem we have, because now we're not sleeping with our two eyes closed, because you have this humongous number of Nigerians that are jobless, unemployed, unemployable, no hopes, and then they've taken to crimes. So nowhere is safe, nobody's safe. The next point, Marco, is, in simple management, we'll talk about, if you want to do investment, you talk about PESTEL, you analyze an environment for investment opportunity. What's the judiciary, the justice system in Nigeria? Are investors coming know that, okay, if there's a breach of contract, they can get justice speedily and fairly, in our courts? What's the answer?
Well, oftentimes we know that, arbitration is preferred nowadays by both investors and in some instances government. I'm
talking about the policy flip-flops, our notoriety when it comes to respect for contracts. That this regime comes and, has maybe, let's say, by Courtney, public-private partnership on the Muritala International Airport in Lagos. Another regime comes and cancels it, just like that, just on a whim, no basis.
Have we had that in recent times?
Many. See, this PID case, that all over the place, is just one of. I was reading a document yesterday. There are many.
You wouldn't say it is a peculiar case.
Oh, my goodness.
Considering the fact that some of the people involved in it, on the side of the government, are already being prosecuted.
Malabu oil is what? Was Malabu oil done in the local government?
The thing is, what intent do we, the people in government have when they go into these deals? When you look at the history, anyway, that's already taken the subject to another place now. But there are definitely big question marks to say, how have we implemented,
the point is that this budget cannot deliver. And I'm seriously
deliver
disappointed.
on what precisely?
The signature agenda of Mr. President by himself. He announced it to the whole world.
So would you say that we're just safe where we are? I mean, we're looking at safety, and that is enough for us.
Maintaining status quo.
Something to that effect. Is that what we're looking at?
I think we have to also consider where we are coming from. And that's starting from probably 2015. This economy went into a deep recession. We're just coming out of that recession. And it has to be gradual. That's my thinking, and I think that is what also informs government's position in the budget. We have to gradually stabilize the economy. There's no other way you can do it. We can't print money. And then we have to, like I said, we have to be realistic about what we have. So it has to be, I'm not saying we don't have challenges. Mm-hmm. He mentioned population. Of course, population is a serious problem. Emir Sanusi mentioned it the other day, just a few days ago. It's a problem.
We keep mentioning it as a problem.
Yeah.
What are we doing about it?
No,
about the problem that we have?
Yeah. If we continue on the issue of population, for example, we need the political will also to come to terms with the issue of our population. Because, for example, Parliament can decide to legislate on it. But you see, even at that level, we need the political will.
Are we even trying to have a conversation on our population? Because it doesn't even look like that is a priority in any quarter of government that you look at.
It's inevitable that we must look at the issue of population. We can't continue the way we are going. If by 2050 we will be about 400 million people, from where do we sustain 400 million Nigerians if we continue this way? So it's a conversation we must be forced to have. It's a conversation that is waiting to be had, and it must be had.
Who are the advocates for this conversation is the question, especially in government quarters. Is it coming from the House of Reps where you are? Yeah. Is it coming from the Senate? Where exactly are the people who are championing, who are seeing the danger looming ahead and are saying, we have to have this conversation? We're not seeing that pressure from anywhere.
Yeah, like I said, there's the economic forum going on at Transcorp right now. And I just mentioned Emir Sanusi, for example, who has been consistent on the issue of population. Population explosion.
And you see the attacks he's been under.
Yes, but that's the thing. That's why I said we must have the political will. There are too many things I will commend this administration for doing in terms of having the political will. Maybe I'm PDP actually, but there are certain things this regime has done, which I think displays political will, because there are certain things that are not just easy. It's like removing subsidy. They haven't removed subsidy. They need to have the political will to do it, because it's important going forward. So there are a lot of things we really must, as a nation, come to terms with, that, look, we can't continue this way. The issue of population is one. The insecurity we have in this country is associated with not being able to feed the number of people we have in this country, because the root cause of it is still economic deprivation. So the issue of population is at the center of stabilizing a whole lot of things, both about our budget and about our future planning. So I will agree with him on that issue of the need to get to terms with the population doesn't reflect what's on ground as a country, and we can't just continue that way.
We'll have to take a moment at this time. Our conversation will continue after this time out. Please stay with us. Well, yes, we still have with us in the studio Honorable Igariwe Enwo, who is Deputy Chair, House Committee on Appropriation, and Mr. Wale Oluwade, who is a Management Consultant and also Principal Partner, Growth Masters Consulting. Well, we're talking about the 2020 budget proposal, and Mr. Oluwade says it is abysmal, while Honorable Honorable Enwo says that we have to grow gradually. And I think it's very important that you also weighed in on this conversation. Where do you stand? Do you think that we need to be a little more courageous with the figures that we propose, considering our population? Or do you think that incrementally is the answer to that particular, to the challenge that we currently face as a country? But gentlemen, let me take you up a little on the assumptions. I know you have said that this is abysmal, and but if you're comparing 2019 with 2020, and of course we also have the recurrent conversation that keeps going on every year in, year out. I mean, people keep asking, why do we have to retain fuel subsidies? You have already mentioned that. And then there's also this exchange rate matter of 305 naira to the dollar. People keep asking, who are the people who get this 305 naira to the dollar? And the ordinary Nigerian doesn't get it. Do businesses get it? We don't know. But that is the rate at which government deals with the private sector. Is it really realistic?
It is not.
Okay, yeah, we're looking at some of the assumptions right now. Looking at 2020 proposed budget fiscal breakdown. Well, I can hardly see this, but if I'm looking at this now, I think we can look at deficits is looking at 556.7 billion. Recurrent is 4.8 trillion. Statutory transfer, 556.7 billion. Capital expenditure, 2.14 trillion. Debt servicing, which some people are, also saying, look at how much we're using to service debt. Can we really be talking about the courage that you're talking about, Mr. Oluwade? Looking at 2.45 trillion naira of the budget. It's taking a huge chunk of the budget. And looking also at sinking funds, are we saving enough to the, for the future? We're supposed to have this NSIA account. We don't know what it is. We're really doing with it. We have not been investing as aggressively or saving as aggressively as we ought to be as a country. But you are talking about being more aggressive. Look at how much we're spending on debt servicing. How possible is that?
We're spending 2.45 trillion on debt servicing, almost as much as what we intend to spend on capital expenditure. But sadly, 2019 capital expenditure, so far, what's been released, to the MDAs is just 295 billion naira. Just recently, like a month ago, the president gave a directive to the Minister of Finance that she should look for, and the phrase is look for, additional 600 billion naira before the end of December to bring the total released for capital expenditure to about 900 billion, which is still less than 40% or 50% of the entire budget for capital. Meanwhile, recurrent expenditure is 100%. We can't grow like that. And, the point is this needs reemphasizing. There is money to fund an expansionary project, a real growth, induced project. There's money. There's money locally. I told you this economy is a $400 billion economy. So if you give local investors the confidence to invest their money, they would invest. If you give, and of course, foreign investors aren't going to come here if local investors are not, participating in your local economy.
But the question is,
yes,
this is on the part of the federal government.
Yes.
The federal government is not alone in this. We
Absolutely.
also have to look at the budget of
states.
subnationals. And
Beautiful.
it would seem that quite a number of subnationals, some of them are getting their act together, even though the policy of the federal government, sometimes they do not agree with it, or it might throw in some instances spanners in the works that they are proposing, but they seem to find ways around this. I'm looking, for instance, at Kaduna State, and recently the agreement that they signed with a Danish company, which is supposed to help them produce milk. The federal government is looking at milk self-sufficiency, for instance. Don't they also have a role to play?
Brilliant question, Mark.
At the end of the day, coming up to the federal government to propose what it is that must be proposed.
This is brilliant. I've been worried really when I see public debates. That is so, I'm sorry to say, intellectually very shallow. Because let me take America for example. When we hear of America being a $20 trillion economy, which America really? Because that $20 trillion economy is actually California, $2.5 trillion, Texas, number 2, $1.9 trillion, New York, that I know very well, 1.7, and then it goes down Chicago, and then all of that. What's the point? If I told you that if you disaggregate this 10.33 trillion naira, and I say it's just 52,000 per capita per Nigerian, what do you think the budget of the states per capita is? Nothing to write home about. Because we all put our focus on the federal government, where the real engine of growth, where growth and development of any nation's economy really takes place at the states and the local governments. Now, I haven't seen on any TV, even channels, where you bring the Commissioner for Finance or Economic Development from the states, not talk of the governor, to sit down on the hot seat and ask them questions. Your budget process, your implementation process, Even the selection, I mean, I know how you and I sat down here to articulate or, recommend suggestions for the president on composing his cabinet. I didn't see any of that happen for the states. So you have 36 states, maybe a few, maybe one or two that seem to know what they're doing. And the rest, just allotting huge sums for security votes and then, barely manage to pay. I mean, there are states that haven't even paid salaries for 3-4 years.
I'm wondering, do we factor, should it play any factor at all in the national proposal, the budget of states, when we're looking at what it is? Yes, I know that the federal government provides the general drive, the general direction that the country should be looking at. But do they also, or should we have a forum whereby the budgets of states are also taking a look at to see if, it's in tandem with the general drive or the general direction the country is looking at?
Well, that is a bit difficult considering the federal system we operate.
On paper.
Considering the federal system we operate. We have the federal system where the states are on their own. They have their state assemblies. Their budget system passes through the state assemblies. So I don't see how, under the 1999 Constitution as it is, unless we decide to amend it. But as it is now, I don't see how we can leverage on what the states are doing from the federal level.
No, my point is not, it shouldn't be, of course, by fiat. But if there is a National Economic Council and there is a meeting every Thursday from what we gather, I don't know if it's every Thursday or once a month?
Once a month, I think.
Yes, I'm not very certain on that now. But if it is, shouldn't there be a general direction? I mean, of course, there has to be areas of cooperation as well, shouldn't there?
Yeah. Of course, it will help generally, but what is on ground now is a situation where every state looks up to its monthly allocation, has its own budget, and does its own thing. That's what is happening now. If there are areas of cooperation, of course, that will be good. But for now, I don't think the federal system we operate has any room for, except when maybe Mr. President or the executive decides at the federal level, maybe to help the states with bailouts. That's the much cooperation we have seen between the federal government and the states.
Bailouts now causing problems.
Yeah, it's causing problems.
Deductions are about to start.
I was going to come there, Malkwe, when he said he doesn't say how. I was going to say this federal government, just like in America where we borrow this presidential system, has a lot of leverage over the states. So much leverage. And the classical example is the issue of the bailouts that were handed over to the states. That is leverage to say to the states, this is what you should do if you're going to qualify to get this bailout.
But they did that. They did give them conditions
to clear salaries,
especially for the second tranche of the bailout. I think the conditions were a lot stiffer, and very few states could actually meet the criteria. So
but
they didn't.
The bailout was essentially to pay salaries. Why should you give bailout? It's like going to a bank to borrow money to eat, to feed your family. Will the bank borrow you money to feed your family?
Yeah, but it's salaries. Some people will argue are more than just paying people to feed their families.
If a state cannot pay salaries, that state has no basis, being a state. They should merge. I mean, this issue about restructuring and all of that is an ongoing debate, and I'm 110% for restructuring, because you see this unwieldy system we're operating is not taking us anywhere.
I want to come back to the budget. If we were saying that, for the first time, the National Assembly has brought out, well, it might not be the first time, but this is the first time I'm seeing it. Yeah. And I think that, other journalists can tell us, I mean, a National Assembly correspondent can confirm, but this is the first time I'm seeing the plan of the National Assembly, now that the budget has been proposed to them, has been read and laid in front of them, the plan that they have to follow through, and when they're actually hoping to be able to pass it. And this is coming out about a day, less than 24 hours after the President read his proposal, which is indeed a good thing to see. How optimistic are you that the National Assembly will be able to follow through with the plans, and that, indeed, perhaps we'll be able to see, whether it is abysmal or not, something that we can work with come 2020.
Yes, like I said earlier, one of the positives of what Mr. President did yesterday was trying to get back our budget process to a financial year system. The Interpretation Act, Chapter 192 of the Laws of the Federation, 1990, defines a financial year as starting from January 1 to December 31st. That is what we are trying to get back to. And that is very, very important, because problems we have had about implementation of the budget, or even us oversighting implementation of the budget, has to do with the fact that the whole thing comes very late and then comes out very late also from Parliament. But this time around, Mr. President has brought it early enough. And of course, we know also by our rules, the moment the president did what he did yesterday, the moment the budget has gone through first reading, because the budget is like any other law, it has to pass through the entire process. So as of today, as I speak to you today, Parliament is going to start the general debates, the debates on the general principles of the budget. So you can see that we have already started work. We have that today being Wednesday 9th, and then tomorrow, debate on the general principles. So as we do that, we have gone through the second reading of the budget. So the next thing, which as you have already shown, we have already, in fact, yesterday after Mr. President left, we had an executive session where we agreed on these processes. So we want to believe that within 3 weeks, and of course, like I said earlier on, it's a two-way thing. Parliament does its own bit. We expect that the executive will also do their own bit by subjecting themselves to this agreement on, I want this, I do not want this, we have to have it this way, which is what we are expected to do through our legislative scrutiny of the budget. So I want to believe that within 3 weeks, if the executive, the ministries, departments, and agencies avail themselves before Parliament, that will get everything done within October and November. November, we are looking at other legislative things we have to do with the budget, and then pass it by December, like we have said.
Other legislative things, including what?
Of course, you don't just bring the budget and it goes that way. The budget goes through a lot of scrutiny. When we engage with the MDAs, we want to know what happened in 2019. So these are processes that won't take a day or a week. So when I say legislative processes, I contemplate a situation where the committees, of course, we run the committee system, that committees that interact with the MDAs go through the process of holding them accountable as to how the previous budget performed, and then why they think this other budget ought to be the way it has been presented. So there's going to be a lot of engagement between Parliament and the MDAs. So that we expect will happen between October and November. And then by December, latest first week of December, we intend to pass the budget.
Well, I know
and
that.
of course, send it to Mr. President for his assent.
You have said that this budget is abysmal. So I'm wondering whether you see anything to, that would give you cause to say, it would seem that at least we're trying to do things a little differently. Do you see anything there?
Well, that seems to be so, but I'm only worried that in all of this haste, the rigor, may be sacrificed in all of this haste.
Yeah, but even in the times when we had a long 6 months, did we
politics,
really see the rigor
that was really
what
politics.
we were looking for?
That was really, because the work, the oversight function of the legislature, it's not for just show. It's not for show. It's to achieve an objective, But secondly, I hope the National Assembly members aren't doing this, because there's a 125 billion budget for the National Assembly themselves, so they could buy their cars and...
No, but it would seem that the budget of the National Assembly has been constant for a while. The last time that a lot of Nigerians made noise... I'm just trying to say that, it's
there are new members. There are new members. They need to buy cars. They need to buy wardrobe allowance.
Indeed. My point is, even in the years when we did not have new members, it would seem that it's still 125 billion. The most we have seen is a reduction of 10 billion.
As a curious person, as someone who is usually very curious, I'm just wondering. I'm just asking that. I hope this undue haste, because I'm wondering what's the haste.
It's not because that they have been bribed.
No, not bribed. But they want the
they have
budget.
been settled.
Not settled. I'm not saying that. But there's a budget, 125 billion for the National Assembly. I hope it's not. They're not doing all of this so they could, buy all their cars they need to buy.
This is a lot of patriotism on the part of this 9th Assembly. We intend to go to suspend plenary because of this. So it's not as if we will be doing plenary or doing other things and then engaging with the MDAs. And I believe if we approach this exercise the way we have conceived it, we don't need 6 months, we don't need 3 months. if we say we want to do it between now and November, I think that is a long time enough. Putting into consideration that the MDAs themselves, the heads of the MDAs will also make it possible for us. As for the budget of the National Assembly, which is not the issue, it's not a serious issue we are discussing.
Why is it not a serious issue?
No, why I'm saying it's not a serious issue is that it's something you have already seen or said that it has been constant. And most people misunderstand what the budget of the National Assembly stands for. The National Assembly is an arm of government. So with a large bureaucracy, and what the budget of the National Assembly, the component is not up to 1% of this
Well, we hope
budget.
that they will continue to make theirs transparent as well, because one of the issues that we have seen is that there is a lot of controversy around the transparency of the budget of the National Assembly. We just did that huge lump sum, and very rarely have we seen a breakdown of the figures.
Now, if people want to know that, I think they should know where to go to. It's nothing anybody should it's nothing anybody should hold as any secret. In the last assembly, I think
it was published once.
There was a public hearing on some of these things, and Parliament was as transparent as they possibly could be.
Gentlemen, we're totally out of time. I know that this conversation will continue. Yes, the budget has just been presented by the President. It was presented yesterday. It's less than 24 hours later on. And of course, reactions are still coming in. You can send in yours using the handles showing on your screen. But we have to thank you both for coming on Sunrise today this morning. Honorable Igariwe Enwo is the Deputy Chair, House Committee on Appropriation. He's also a member of the PDP. Mr. Wale Oluwade is a management consultant and also principal partner, Growth Masters Consultant. Gentlemen, thank you for coming on Sunrise today this morning.
Thank you.
We take a break at this moment. Oh, beg your pardon. We hand over right now to the gentlemen in Lagos. And they're waiting for me. Chamberlain.